Righty, chaps. Let's talk about something a bit cheerful today. The prospects of a possible AGI revolution. We find ourselves in a very interesting, a very weird moment. And I present to you my hot take for the year. One of my hot takes for the year. I think within the next 4 years, we're going to have a revolution on the streets in the United States and in the UK and parts of Europe, and it might flow over to other parts of the world. So, what is this hodgepodge of different things that creates this very incendiary moment? First, we've got whispers of possible AGI. We've got whispers of recursive self-improvement. Chaps from OpenAI, they've been tweeting in complete giddiness about seeing things that they're very vague about. They're not revealing any details, but they talk about this thing that they see, and it just blows the socks off in terms of being paradigm shifting for them, right? Because again, we didn't have, for even the people who are working in the industry, they didn't really expect things to be as rapid, progress to be as rapid as it has been. And so tons of these chaps, Noam Brown, etc., they've been tweeting out saying that, we will have start seeing hints of recursive self-improvement. We will have start seeing, they're not even talking of AGI anymore. They're talking of a possible route to ASI. Again, Ilya, he's been talking about that since a while, and then at the latest New Reps conference, he was making a bigger deal out of it, right? So, in short, we've got ASI coming soon. And with ASI, with widespread adoption of AGI, you're going to have a massive upheaval in the economy, in the job market. You're going to have millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people lose their jobs, right? And that tends to be a pretty strong precursor to revolutions, people losing their stability. Then you got the fact that there's been this increasing sense of discontent, this increasing sense of disillusionment in the general populace. And you see this by, there are many indicators, there are many statistics which point to this. But one of the things that is worth noting more than anything else is the increasing radicalization, right? People are moving more away from the center, more towards the left and the right, right? In France, in the United States, everywhere. And again, that is an indicator of a deep rot in the system, and in the system catering to what people want, what the majority, what the hoi polloi want. Then we can forget this point, but I think this is also quite illustrative, and it'll be an indicator of what's about to happen, right? So the incoming administration, the signals that they've been sending with an oligarchic bent to the proceedings, meme coin grift, imperialist rhetoric, zero-sum relationship with their allies, all of this points to an administration that is going to be not going to work towards the people, right? It's not going to, again, going back to the first Trump presidency, you can't find too many things that he actually did for the people. And I think that grift is only going to get stronger. Make America great again was actually make America grift again. I mean, this is the kind of grift that we've never seen in history from any country, even banana republics. And for that to happen in America just a day before the inauguration, and with so much goodwill earned, with so much political capital earned over the last 2 years, just burned like that, that tells you that basically the administration had their own mind about what they want to do. They just want to line up the pockets of, the billionaires. That seems to be the sentiment coming from what you can make of, what they've been doing. We're also seeing an increasing amount of discontent with globalization and with the status quo, and we're going to start seeing the wealth gap increase even further, right? Because the way the AGI dynamics are going to, the AI dynamics, AI mass adoption dynamics are going to play out is you're abstracting away all of the middle layers, right? So usually what happens is that you got a certain problem to solve in the economy, in the world, in society, and there are multiple companies working to solve that problem, and all of these companies hire tons of people, because again, people's capacities are limited, and all these companies need these many people, right? There are lots of companies that don't need that many people, but for these companies, the profit margins are so good that the Googles, the Fangs of the world, that they can afford to do that. And there's some whispers that the US government actually incentivizes these companies to hire more people despite them not needing as many people, right? But the general trend is that you got tons of pay companies solving a particular problem in the economy. Now, once you got AGI in the picture, the world's best AGI is going to solve that problem, right? So a company is going to be built around that, and it's going to be able to do all of the menial jobs. It's going to be able to do all of the jobs above that layer, right? So you're talking of basically not needing anyone except the people at the very top, the decision makers, and even though you can actually remove them, but because these are people who will be building the companies, because these are people protected by capital, they won't, right? So again, the shorter version of this is that we're not going to see an increase. We are going to see an increase in the net amount of value that the economy generates, right? So our global GDP at this moment is like $85 trillion. It's probably going to rise to, yeah, it's obviously going to supercharge productivity, there's no doubt about it. But the riches are not going to, the wealth is not going to go to, it's not going to trickle down, right? Which is what the tech CEOs tell people. It's not going to, they had to say that because, again, vested interest and all, but that's not how it's going to pan out. That's never how it was going to pan out, right? So we are going to see an increasing amount of wealth go to people at the top, and we're going to see the wealth gap widen like it never has, right? Like it never could. Because now we are talking of, in the year 2050, we are talking of like a $300 trillion economy, right? And once you start incorporating the space economy, etc. And we'll probably by that time we'll have UBI, etc. But you're still talking of having an insanely increasing amount, rapidly increasing wealth gap in the world. And I think that's going to piss off a lot of people. We saw this with United Health, where the assassination of the CEO, where a lot of people on the far left, I should say, they said that, this guy deserved it, right? Like there's a lot of public discontent in the left and the far left against the CEOs, against the wealthy people, right? A lot of people said this about the wildfires in California, that the people who got their houses burned, they deserved it because they were rich people, right? So there's this brewing sense of discontent. And again, this is partially fed by perceptions, by social media. But this also brings me to another point, which is becoming increasingly prominent, right? People spend more and more time in their own echo chambers, and they have an increasingly warped view of the world, right? And again, so if in your worldview, if you think that people who are rich, they're evil, then you would condone killing those people, or you would condone, doing all sorts of things that might otherwise be evil, right? And that's what's happening a lot on the right side, on the far right side. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of brewing discontent against globalization. There have been movements, there's been an increasing shift towards the far right in Europe and in America for that matter. And this could, I don't know, difficult to make predictions, but this was always going to happen, right? Because again, humans are tribal. This is the fact that European societies have gone as far as they have towards making multiculturalism work is a testament to, the ingenuity, the resourcefulness. But this is always bound to come to a head at some point, because you can't keep on having an unrestricted rate of migration to countries at the risk of wiping out local cultures and at the risk of homogenizing the entire planet, right? And obviously there are people whose homeland that is for thousands of years, they're going to feel a certain way about it. And we are starting to see those voices come out in the open and become more prominent with the rise of parties like Reform and AFD and the National Rally Party, I think that's the one. And even the rhetoric in Donald Trump's camp, lots of people in Donald Trump's camp also talk about and use certain incendiary language around immigration, right? So there's going to be an increasing amount of discontent that is going to come to a head about, the whole state of affairs. And I think this is going to lead to, this is my hot take. It took me 10 minutes to get to the hot take. My hot take is that within 4 years in this presidency, because people are going to see these things, right? Because people pin so much hope on this presidency that he's going to give us the power, he's going to make us wealthier, he's going to make us richer, he's going to make us more well off, right? He's going to solve these economic problems. Turns out, grifters only grift, right? And he's only going to make it worse. I don't have a horse in this race. I don't have anything strong to say about Donald Trump and his shenanigans. All I'm saying is that based on the track record, based on everything that he said and all of the rhetoric of the last 2 months since he's become the president-elect, it is very likely that he's going to focus not on strengthening the middle class or bringing back jobs to America. Is going to focus mostly on lining up the pockets of the multimillionaires and the billionaires, right? And yeah, that is going to piss off a lot of people. Again, on the left, I said left and right combined, on the left and on the right, because a lot of people on the right, they felt disenfranchised because of what's been happening in the last 34 years, and they pinned their hopes on this Donald Trump being the messiah figure. And when they realized, oh, we've been duped again, they're going to be pissed off, mighty pissed off, royally pissed off. So we're going to have a revolution in the streets, likely going to have a revolution in the streets, first in the United States, because that's where a lot of these factors are the most pronounced, and then it's going to spill over into the US. When the US sneezes, Europe catches a cold, right? The rest of the world catches a cold. And because of the pieces are quite similar in both the US and the UK and the rest of Europe, we are going to see the revolution spill off into Europe pretty soon after it breaks out just like what happened during COVID, what happened during it's happened like BLM, etc., right? So we've seen this happen with Palestine, etc., true, right? Because revolutions, the contagions in revolutions can be very contagious, right? So that's likely to happen. I do predict, ironically, that the less well-off nations, the less advanced nations, the developing nations are going to fare better. They're going to cope better with AGI, at least at the start. Well, only at the start, right? And the way that's going to happen, the reason that's going to happen, is that most of the Western economies, they're built on the service industry, right? That is a huge part of the American economic model. Now, that is also the industry which is going to be hit the first and the fastest and the most. So the programmers, white collar workers, right? Like they are going to lose stuff pretty quickly, lose their jobs, lose prospects of a job, right? Prospects of making anything in this new world pretty quickly. And so you're going to see those people, and then again, even with truck drivers, etc., you're going to see a lot of really distinct, really unlikely group of people come together for that revolution, because that will be the ultimate anti-elite revolution, right? When the elites will be the people who own this will be like Karl Marx's bad dream come to life. So he was right. He probably will be proven right, just at a far longer time scale than he predicted, because I think he predicted revolutions like this to happen. I think I don't remember the details, but he wouldn't have predicted it to take so long, right? And for AGI to be the thing to make it happen. But here we are. Okay, so back to my point, right? So these countries, the US, the UK, Europe, they're going to have the biggest disruption. Countries like India, countries like China, I wouldn't say. Let me cover China at a later moment. Let me cover the poorer nations, Latin America, India, African nations. I think these countries, there's obviously a greater reliance on agriculture and on more primitive industries, right? And AGI is going to be, because these nations have less technology, less tech infrastructure, AGI is going to take longer to make its way into these nations, and it's also going to disrupt agriculture and those kinds of things at a slower rate, right? So these nations would be more equipped. At the same time, they would be the least equipped, because what's going to get the US, the UK, and the rest of these nations off the hole in Europe and in the Middle East and in East Asia is having significantly meaningful UBI programs, right? Because these nations will be able to afford that. Now, nations like India, Latin America, they are not going to be able to afford it. They are not. So over the longer term, again, it does not, it makes for grim reading. There are solutions that we can talk about what these different nations and these different tiers should do, but that's for a separate conversation. In this conversation, we just talk about, possible AGI revolutions and what we could do to, stay off the prospects of fun. Now, this is a huge prediction. Let's not get it twisted, right? Because we haven't had a revolution, like a proper revolution, in a while in the West. And yeah, I didn't make this prediction lightly, but I'm looking at some of the decisions that the top labs are making. You hear about, for example, I don't know how much credence to give to, the Sachir biology case where Elon Musk, etc., they are indicating that he was not assassinated, he was murdered by OpenAI because he was about to he was a whistleblower, right? And he was about to be a key witness in a case that could have been make or break for OpenAI, right? Because it was one of those really consequential cases. Because the entire OpenAI empire is built on data. And if you take that away, then you remove all of the legitimacy from everything else that they are built, because everything else is built on top of the data, right? Because all of the results they have been standing on the shoulder of giants. Now they're really good at scaling things up, they're really good at recruiting, and yeah, they're really good at, Sam Altman was really good at selling the vision, etc. Huge kudos to all of that, but there's no denying that they are kind of becoming unscrupulous, right? For example, choosing to go down the closed AI path, choosing to turn from non-profit to for-profit, allegations of murdering a whistleblower, then talks about, tweaking training data to improve their benchmarks, etc., right? Or, yeah, foul play everywhere. And even ignoring that part, the thing that gets me the most concerned about this is that these companies, they will release AGI at the fastest rate. So I'm not going to repeat to you the verbatim statement, but I've been reading statements by OpenAI, by Sam Altman, etc., and they basically want to get ASI into the world as soon as possible. Now that sounds all great and dandy, but you don't release ASI into a vacuum, right? You're releasing into a world in which people have real jobs. There's a lot of pain that can happen with mass job layoffs, right? There's a lot of pain that can happen when the entire the entire structure of this world, the entire world models that people have are shifted at a deep fundamental level, right? And that's what would happen basically. We would have to renew our world models substantially, and we need time for that. Humans need time for that. Like the kind of transition that AGI would bring, the transition comes comes pain, right? And that's bound to happen. The pain can be minimized in this case, but the way the open AIs of the world are headed and the statements that they keep on putting out, seems to me that they want to maximize the profits rather than thoughtfully deploy AGI at different stages so that people get time to actually, just soak in a new world that has a new level of AI, right? Because at this point, it's most useful to talk about AI as a thing happening at different levels. So, the crazy thing to consider, it's not that crazy, is that for the first time, a company can launch and deploy a piece of technology that can pretty much impact every single person on the planet in a very short time scale, right? This was never possible. And this is what gets me the most concerned about the whole flippant attitude that OpenAI seems to have to this. We should place frameworks, and we're going to get to that. The reason they have this flippant attitude in the first place is greed tends to have this effect on people, right? Like, if people start from that, again, it's said that the prospects of money and money itself, it amplifies what you have in your own heart, right? And so, at the very OpenAI is a for-profit company. They want to maximize profits. They know that if they are the first to ASI, The profits for them are untold. They're in the trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions, right? While the risks that come with a possible deployment of AGI and ASI are mostly carried by society. So for them, it's easily a wager worth making. It is not a wager worth making for the rest of society. And that is why we need people. We don't have any of these people in government. We don't have, and this is why democracies, and this is why our current political structures just don't cut it at moments like these, when we simply cannot allow two, three, four companies to dictate the path ahead for us, right, as a species, and to increase the chances of a really destructive trajectory, a really destructive outcome. This is even more disappointing because, after the debacle with social media, where it destroyed so many people's minds, someone just tweeted out today that, social media is the opiate of the masses, and someone was saying that it's like the crack and the heroin of the masses, right? Social media, there are people who say that, social media has been the worst thing to happen to humanity. I wouldn't go so far. I wouldn't even call it opiate of the masses. People need to take personal responsibility. But there's no denying the fact that, the very addictive nature of it, you could say the same thing about lots of other technologies, but the very way it was designed to be addictive, the very way it was designed for you to keep the user running this hedonic treadmill to get the next hit, right? And to keep you in your echo chamber and to spread misinformation and disinformation and all of the other, for example, causing mental health issues with young girls and young boys for that matter, right? All of these issues, they're serious, don't get me wrong, but these are issues which fade in comparison with the potential negative consequences of ASI and widespread AGI. And this is super disappointing because social media was supposed to be a wake-up call, right? There were so many studies, there were so many testimonies, there were so many discussions, there are so many discussions, there are so many people who are super concerned, who have been super concerned about this, who have been talking out in the public. Remember the Facebook whistleblower, like 3-4 years back, actually wrote an article about that. And yet, we're allowing a far more dangerous piece of technology, and I'm saying this as someone who absolutely loves working on AGI and would love to see it come about, right? But again, we're going to get to that point. We're going to get to the point about how we want to actually deploy it, the time scale, and how much preparation we need to put in place for us to feel confident and for us to feel good and for us to feel safe about it. That's the whole point of this. Yeah, so we fumbled the ball so badly with social media, and we're fumbling the ball again, this time with potentially 1,000 times more dire consequences. And consequences where we won't be able to redo, we won't get a redo, we won't get another chance to rectify our mistakes or, undo the consequences of our inaction in this very moment, where people need to rise up, the institutions need to come to the fore. Even actual nations are losing sight of the importance of safety in the face of, trillions of dollars of value. For example, last year we had AI safety talks in the UK. This year, that conference was changed to AI something something, which was more to do with, the economic prospects of increasing productivity, of increasing GDP, etc. Right? And again, all of this speaks to the fact that in the face of these trillions of dollars, in the face of these dollar signs, neon dollar signs, everyone's losing their minds, and we're forgetting that we simply cannot afford to just charge towards this outcome mindlessly. So yeah, things seem to be primed for a fast deployment, and the ensuing shock that comes with something of that kind. The big question then is, how do we prevent that from happening, right? How do we minimize the chance of a revolution, or at least mitigate the impacts of a potential revolution by decreasing the number of people who feel the pain and the intensity of the pain that people feel? So this is to do with two things mostly. One is that people are going to lose jobs, right? Lots of people are going to lose, over a 50-year time span, literally everyone's going to lose their jobs. except for maybe like, I don't know, few million people. But in the shorter term, how should we go about minimizing this pain? The best way to go about this is to have a more planned, a more structured approach to an AGI rollout, where we actually put the institutions in place, the institutions that can soak up the whiplash, the effects of the first few months and years of AGI, right? So that's number one, putting the institutions in place. And right now our infrastructure is just not equipped. It's just not being prepared to deal with that kind of AGI rollout. It's just not. There are no institutions that are going to transition us towards a post-UBI world. There are no institutions that are going to ensure safe AGI, that's going to ensure aligned AGI. So we want to start putting those institutions in place. And we want to have a roadmap where, for example, the government could mandate that every company ought to continue to hire people in proportion to the profits. Yeah, profits will be better than revenue, right? In proportion to the profits. And over time, the government can decrease that requirement. So at the start, let's say that for every 100K that a company makes, they have to employ one person, right? Over time, the government can say for every 200K, you can employ one person. And so that gives people more time to prepare to transition to that post-AGI world. Another thing that we want to do, this is super important, is that there'll be lots of people love their jobs. It could be 10% of the population, it could be 20% of the population, but there are people who love their jobs. There are people who love to build stuff, who love to build startups, who love to build businesses. What we don't want to happen is that AGI economically prizes these people out, right? From doing the things that they would have loved and being paid for it in proportion to the value that they were bringing to the people, to society. This ensures that people still have the freedom, still have the autonomy, still have choice in how they want to go about in that new world, right? Because one of our core civilizational principles is that of freedom, is that of autonomy, is that of a greater choice, is that of increasing amount of choice. In an AI framework that resists that principle, for example, the framework that companies would love to adopt, that is one which must be resisted at all costs. So those are some concrete steps that you can take. So again, just to reiterate, step number one is to ensure that people who want to continue to work, they can continue to work by mandating that companies need to hire n number of people in proportion to the profits, right? So let's say that a company makes $1 million of profits, they need to hire n. N can at the start be 10. Different countries are going to have a different n, but the point is that each country would have its own n, and over time this n can decrease so that companies can continue to increase their productivity, and this also increases the timeline in which this transition happens, right? Because the best way to reduce the pain is to increase the amount of time over which this transition happens. So that's number one, setting up an institution that is built towards catering, towards designing the layers beyond the foundational layers of alignment, layers of safety, right? Safety protocols, robustness. That is the need of the hour, because we cannot let ASI out into the world without having protections in place, without having safety precautions in place. That's step number two. And the third major thing that we could do is to have staggered launches of these models, right? So we don't want to go straight from a model that has, let's say, is 95% compared to your 99th percentile human to 98 in terms of its benchmarks, right? We don't want to have that kind of a transition. We want to do it in a very staggered way to allow people to get used to the new models. And that was how OpenAI wanted to do it. But now that the money signs are getting greener and greater in size, the whole attitude and approach seems to have changed. We haven't got the best track record of being great stewards of our own species, let alone of the planet. But this requires us to rise to the occasion more than any other occasion in the past, right? This is existential in the way few other things were apart from the nuclear moment. And one of the things which prevented us from being good stewards is not being long term. It's not like taking a longer term view on things. We need to do that. We need to understand that the changes which are going to happen in the next few years, they're going to have far reaching consequences into the future of our species. And we want to be very prudent in how we go about making those choices, making those calls, so that we can maximize human freedom and flourishing and minimize the pain of this transition. Alright, I'll end this with a quick meta note about what prompted me to write this. So I've been listening to a lot of things from OpenAI and other labs, just people who want to accelerate us into that future without a care or concern about what might happen. So for example, today I saw a tweet by, I think it was, some prominent figure who said that they wouldn't mind being rendered extinct if a superior species takes over, that is AI, right? If a superior species takes over, I forgot to put air quotes around it. And there's that kind of attitude is rife in a lot of the tech circles. They want to accelerate us into the future. Like, a lot of people don't have a strong stake into the future. And I understand that, fear for the future and trepidation with change, it can come from one of two major places, right? One is where you love the present so much, like you're very invested in the present, and two is where you're fearful of the future, right? So for those two reasons, you might not be very excited about the future. Now, I'm very excited about the future. I have this vision of a glorious future of us inhabiting millions of planets across thousands of galaxies, trillions and quadrillions of humans living their best lives, flourishing, full of freedom, expanding the scope of consciousness, which is the most beautiful thing there is about our universe. And for that vision to be actualized, we need to ensure that we don't make any missteps, and we are most likely to make missteps. This is our great filter moment. And so we don't want to get this wrong. We simply cannot afford to get this wrong. And so a lot of the rhetoric I've been seeing online, coming from the labs, it makes me wonder about the fact that there's a camp for which greed seems to have taken over, and there's a camp for which irrational exuberance seems to have taken over. And we cannot afford either of those things to be the dominant paradigm in this moment, when we need to be the most prudent we've ever been as a species. And so that we can build that glorious future where, those quadrillions of humans can design and actualize their destinies. And that's where we want to head to. So I'll end on that note. I'll catch you soon. Thanks for the time. Cheers.